Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about autistic burnout, and I'm Kelsey. I'm a registered clinical counselor, accredited clinical supervisor, and I'm so glad you're here, especially for this topic. I feel like autistic burnout is one of those things that people don't really talk enough about. And even in the clinical world, autistic burnout often gets missed and misunderstood as anxiety, depression, other types of burnout. There's a lot of comorbidities there too. So I'm really glad you're here so we can actually talk about this. I feel like this is most widely talked about within the autistic community. So if you're familiar with it, great. Hopefully, you take something away. Otherwise, perhaps it's a new topic for you and it's really worth talking about. I myself wear a couple hats in life and when I do these presentations. I'm an autistic person myself, and I'm also a neurodiverse, affirming, trauma focused clinical counselor. I wear both those hats kind of in every aspect of my life. And this truly is from my heart to yours. And I genuinely mean that when I say that. I know what it's like to live bumpy moments. I know what it's like to work through them personally. And I know what it's like to bear witness to people really working through tough moments. So this work really is from my heart to yours. Just a little bit about me. I've been in the field for about 20 years and in clinical counseling for about 10. And I run a group practice called Healing Spaces. Before we dive in, you're welcome to join for a land acknowledgement. This is the land that I'm living on, but wherever you're living, you're welcome to honor that land as well. So just join me in a moment if you're open. I live, work, and play on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I benefit greatly from the preservation of this land that has been cared for by these people since time immemorial, and I'm committed to doing my part to heal historic and ongoing harms done to these people and to this land. And for those of you that don't know, I live in North Vancouver, Canada, and this is an image representing Turtle Island. All right. Lots to talk about here today. So we'll get through the most that we can. What is autistic burnout? And then we'll talk a bit about autistic burnout prevention, autistic burnout recovery, when trauma compounds recovery, which is really, really common. And if someone you love is struggling, how you can support them. And then there's a couple other resources as well. Let's start with what autistic burnout is. Before we dive in, just take a moment and think about, what does this term mean to you? Have you bared witness to someone in your life burning out? Have you yourself experienced burnout? How do you know? Is this completely foreign? Just take a moment and think about what this means to you. Dorota Ali and colleagues recently wrote an article, and they talk about burnout as experienced by autistic people, a systematic review. They highlighted a few areas about autistic burnout. Because this area is so widely understudied and underacknowledged, I thought this was really great that there was an article. I have that linked in the references at the end. Autistic burnout can be experienced as intense physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. This is not the type of tired that a couple nights sleep will help restore. It's much deeper than that. A loss of functioning skills, a reduced ability to cope with daily demands. So those things that you just do as a person in the world, they become more difficult to do. They take extra energy. Increased sensitivity to sensory and social stressors. So maybe you have a time where you are able to manage wearing certain types of clothes and a time where that's too much. Same with noise. And this wouldn't be an acute moment, it would be a longer moment and needing much more recovery time than usual from just about everything, being a human and existing in a world. Those are some of the identifying factors that Dorota and her colleagues uncovered when talking about autistic burnout. Now, there is a strong correlation between anxiety and depression and autism, but how do we know if autistic burnout is similar or different? It is different. There can be some correlation and some similar experiences. So, even if the expression seems similar, I'm a bit more anxious, maybe going out and participating in social activities. I'm a bit more anxious about going and trying something new. I feel like I have low energy and it's really hard to find motivation or get out of my jammies or get out of my home. Those would be symptoms we would often see and categorize as anxiety or depression, but the source is different here. The source for autistic burnout is chronic, ongoing, over functioning, over masking, not being able to hear or respond appropriately to one's own needs for one's own system. And so that's where the source is different than anxiety and depression. And this is where I think a lot of autistic burnout gets missed and misunderstood. So if you're presenting to somebody and you aren't aware that you're an autistic person and you're talking about all these difficulties, a clinical counselor, a clinician, or a physician might think that you might be struggling with anxiety or depression and follow that path of treatment, which might not work. It might help a little bit. Autistic burnout isn't known widely outside of the autistic community. And so it often gets misunderstood as anxiety or depression. So to work out workplace burnout, we often talk about burnout as related to workplace burnout. And there can be symptoms of workplace burnout with autistic burnout. However, with workplace burnout, oftentimes if there's a change in a work-related factor, maybe you have a shift to your role or your team or your manager, and those things would often shift and relieve some of that workplace stress and relieve some of the burnout. But again, for autistic burnout, it's not just the workplace. It's one system, one central nervous system is fried. It's too much for too long, and you haven't been able to find the right place to respond appropriately or accommodate your own needs. And so again, this might be a presentation of autistic burnout, but the source again is different. I would say that thinking about anxiety, depression, and workplace burnout as kind of symptoms of autistic burnout would be more appropriate. Devin Price is an author of a book about unmasking, really popular book. Again, I do cite that later in the resources if you want to check that out. Really, really good resource as well. And Devin Price talks about autistic burnout is what happens when an autistic person has spent too long masking and pushing themselves beyond their limits. Every person, every autistic person is different, and we have different sensitivities and we have different needs. And what happens is when we have been taught to not hear our own needs, not respond to our own needs for too long, when the expectation is adhering to a standard that is not appropriate for our systems, and yet we try to push through and power through and grit through and keep doing it, over time that erodes our ability to function. It's like you're borrowing energy from tomorrow and next month and next year for so long that your system goes, I can't keep up with this anymore, and it collapses a little bit or a lot of it. And so when we're thinking about who we are as a person, or whoever that person is that you're thinking about and why you're here at this workshop, we want to think about the different parts of who they are. What are these person's strengths? What are their needs? What are some adaptations that are accessible? Not that we have to push through to adapt, but accessible adaptations that we can change within our world, change within our lifestyle. What are some tools that are really helpful or might be really helpful to obtain or learn or practice? And what does recovery look like? Now, when one person is in a place of burnout, the recovery might be much larger. The strengths might be much smaller. The needs might be much bigger, because in that moment in time, your system has been going for so long that you need to stop doing. You need to give your body and your brain and your whole being a chance to slow down and recover. And when we haven't had opportunities to do that over time, or we haven't understood that that's what we need, or we've been taught that we aren't allowed to have that, or we shouldn't have that, then we're overriding our own system's needs. And then this can often be the result. How can we talk about autistic burnout prevention? Common causes of burnout. This isn't extensive, but these are common causes. Masking, sensory overload, social exhaustion, lack of accommodations or right fit support. Understanding the world isn't built for autistic folks. That's where that social model of disability comes in between society and that autistic person is where the disability exists. Because we're such sensitive beings, we move through the world so differently from allistic folks. And when we try to adhere to a different standard, we're consistently overriding our systems to the point where a lot of people can't even hear or know what their own needs are anymore, or they lose that because they've overridden it for so long. And there's often a stigma and a misunderstanding of what it is to be autistic, what our needs are, what our functioning is in the world, all of these complex pieces. And when we override our system, when we pretend we're someone we're not, we're dishonoring who we are. And I've always felt that when we don't live in alignment with who we are, that's when our system gets loud and lets us know that, hey, you're not listening, you're out of alignment with who you are, we need to come back. And sometimes if we've been out of alignment for a really long time, the communication from our system will get louder and louder and louder. So let's think you're fatigued and you get a cold. Okay, you're able to recover. You aren't able to recover, and maybe your cold turns into pneumonia or bronchitis or a sinus infection. Okay, I can take space to recover. That doesn't happen. And so it grows and grows. And I think about that in the same way with autistic burnout. We might find that our system's a bit more sensitive and we try to respond. Maybe we're not able to respond. Maybe we think we shouldn't be sensitive. And that's the internalization of these stigmas and misunderstandings. It's internalized ableism. And so instead of listening to our own systems and trying to come back in alignment with who we are, we pretend we're someone else. We try to override our own systems to fit into a world that wasn't built for us. And we're eroding our whole being. And yet the complexity again is that the world doesn't understand this. And because so many of us are so skilled at masking, we haven't communicated this to the outside world. And so sometimes we feel like we're living a double life. I'm going to pull up my bootstraps and function for this moment or this time or this thing. And then I'm going to come home and kind of collapse. But the world doesn't see that and they don't know. So how we can talk about prevention is honest reflection of who we are and honoring who we are. I've used this image before in other presentations. I really love it because it weaves in talking about who we are and how we interact with society and our community. And what are the ethos that we live by, that our community lives by, that our society lives by. So taking a chance, either pause this and do it right now or come back to it later, or just think about it in micro moments, like when you're in the shower or having a glass of water, and just take inventory of who you are, what feels good to you, what doesn't feel good to you, and just start there with noticing. As you open up that door to start to understand more of who you are, and you start finding an opportunity to honor it, trust me, you'll start to notice more and more. Another question when we're talking about prevention is what is getting in the way of honestly honoring who you are? Are you struggling with acceptance and self-love of who you are? Are you masking who you are, who you think you need to be? Are you having difficulty accessing and understanding your own sensations, your own feelings, your own emotions? Have you been taught something over time that you need to be a certain way? are the historic wounds that are still at play in your system that are impacting how you interact with the world. So I've created a download on our website as well. I'm calling it the Autism Self-Exploration Wheel. And it's a chance to really deep dive into self-inventory. And I think that this is a really missed opportunity, because when we take that chance to truly understand who we are, we can unpack so many pieces. So what are my strengths? Am I able to have a space where they can really shine? Are they being limited right now? What does recovery look like for me? If I am able to access that, who am I versus when I'm not able to access that? What are some of the needs that I have? What are the needs that are being met? What are the needs that are not being met? Am I able to make any adaptations and changes to my lifestyle or to things in my environment that might help a little bit? And what are some tools that I can lean on? What am I leaning on right now that's helpful? And maybe able to access more of that? What are some other things that might be helpful? What do other people do when they're struggling in this way? First of all, capture who you are with honest inventory, and then start to kind of unpack and explore how your life is set up. Because I really feel like one of the pieces that leads to burnout is when who we are is mismatched with how we're living. If we're able to find ways to honor who we are within our lifestyle, within their world, within our community, we aren't going to find ourselves as burnt out as often or burnt out in the same way. So thinking about when I'm balanced, what might my wheel look like, and when I'm unbalanced? How do I know I'm feeling balanced? What is it like when I'm starting to feel a bit unbalanced before I'm in a full-on burnout? How do I know I'm becoming more unbalanced? And then where am I today? How am I doing right now? So if you are in burnout right now, or you're moving through a burnout recovery, it's not that you've done anything wrong. It's that your system's been working too hard for too long, and it's now kind of caught up with you a bit. These complexities of being taught for so long to override our systems, to bear down, to grit through, to disconnect from who we are and our sensations because we're too much or too emotional or too sensitive, or that's not how we ought to be. And so we're constantly told to live out of alignment with ourselves. How can we not come to live out of alignment with ourselves? So think about a power grid that's been overloaded for too long. You might have a spark or a short circuit here and there, but eventually everything starts to shut down. And you can't fix it just by turning it on exactly the same. Changes have to happen. So slowly, slowly, circuit by circuit, thoughtfully, you might take out some wires, you might take out some power drains, like that are taking the power away from the grid. You might bring in some different adapters or a solar panel, I don't know. But this is a really powerful opportunity to really take inventory, look at how we're living and see, if I keep going this way, what's going to happen? Sometimes gifts are given in really weird packaging. If we're able to use this autistic burnout, interact with it as an opportunity to understand ourselves more, perhaps we're able to make shifts and changes that allow us to live a life that's honoring of who we are and isn't asking too much of our systems. So if you're in recovery right now, slow and steady. Your nervous system is probably hypervigilant, on hyper alert. I think of autistic burnout as super flop mode. Everything goes still. Your whole system kind of shuts down. But you might also notice that small things are activating you more. You might be more reactive, more snappy. You might feel fire rise more quickly. Or perhaps you're more of an internalizer and you might collapse a bit more into that people pleasing or not speaking up. It's harder to speak up right now because it is harder to speak up right now when you don't have a lot of energy in your system or you feel totally frozen. So you might notice that these stress responses are much louder right now. And again, that doesn't mean you have to do anything about it. Just know that you're kind of raw and you deserve a lot of rest and recovery. And again, it's not that a couple nights of sleep is going to help here, it's much deeper than that. If you think about recovery after surgery, it's slow and it's incremental. You're going to try something and then you're going to rest and recover. And you're going to see how it goes. And you might overdo it and then you have to recover more. Thinking about that same tender approach to recovery, it's not that you're doing nothing, but it's that you're very, very thoughtful, and building in space to recover is a part of the recovery. The tricky thing is we don't have access to external measures. We can't always know in the same way with pain and recovery how it's going to go or what it might be or what it might look like. It's so much more nuanced than that. So if we're spending time on an outing that's going really well, and then we have an interaction with somebody that doesn't go well, that might drain us significantly. We couldn't have known that beforehand. And we can't always know how long it's going to take to recover. So we have to really listen to ourselves and honor ourselves. And that might come with unpacking and unlayering some beliefs, some negative beliefs that you might hold about not being good enough, or I should be able to, or other pieces that you're holding. Because again, if we continue to dishonor ourselves, our feelings, our experiences, it's going to be much harder to recover. So if you've had an interaction that went well for everybody else and you alone feel very impacted and like you need a long recovery, it doesn't matter that other people didn't have that same experience. You did. And so you deserve to attend to your own needs. There are lots of challenges with this, right? And other people don't always see it or understand it. It's misunderstood. There's a lot of stigma out there about misunderstanding and not knowing how to support somebody. What others can see who they know you as. Maybe you've been a really high masker for a long time. And so they know you as a certain person, they know you in a certain way. And so they're learning a new part of you as you are too, what it's like when you live in alignment with yourself and you're honoring your own system. But they might try to get access to the old you or a previous you. And so they might knock on that door and wonder why you aren't there. And so that can be a really tricky one. You might notice that people are a little confused and they don't know how to respond or support you. And maybe you can do XYZ, go on an outing or go to the store or have a day of work, but also what's the cost? Right now in this tender time, this isn't forever, but what would that cost be to you? Are you again borrowing from tomorrow or next month or next year? Is it worth it to do this thing? So there's a lot of challenges, and we don't have a rubric for this. The rubric is learning and listening to your own system and your own being, and that can be really complicated. And you might be different after. If we use that metaphor of the power grid, it's likely after such a significant event that there would be changes to the wiring or the setup, or maybe they kind of prune some things that aren't super helpful for the system's functioning. You might be different too, and that's okay. Maybe your difference is actually moving in alignment with who you are. But that also means often that we're grieving how we were living before, who we thought we were, the relationships and the dynamics that existed before, because we can't always go back to that in the same way after we've gone through such a significant change in our own being. And we really do need to listen to our systems. I had an experience when I was much younger in my adolescence, and now I know that it was an autistic burnout. But at the time, I didn't know, my family didn't know, my healthcare team didn't know, and I was actually hospitalized for 6 weeks for unknown nervous system related difficulties. which again, now we know is autistic burnout. But if we don't listen, it will likely get louder and louder because our system is calling us, hey, you're not listening. Hey, you need to hear me. Hey, it's too much. It's too much. It's too much. And we can only handle so much until we collapse. When trauma compounds recovery. So, trauma is different from neurodiversity. However, there's a lot of overlap. If you don't know, Janae, the trauma geek, check her out. Oh my gosh, she's fantastic. She talks a lot about the overlap of neurodiversity and trauma. They're different, and yet there's a lot of correlation. I haven't ever met an autistic person that hasn't carrying trauma from going through the world that isn't built for who they are and being told that you have to live a certain way and be a certain way. And if you aren't, there's something inherently wrong with you. That's kind of a setup that's a little ripe for creating trauma. Living in a world that isn't inherently honoring of who we are, it takes a lot of effort and intention to learn who we are and then work to live in alignment with that. Trauma can definitely compound recovery. By that, I mean, think about it as kind of layers. So at one layer, you have autistic burnout. Your system is in survival crash mode, preservation mode. And then a layer on top or below might be the traumatic experiences that you've had in life. And so if you've had a relational trauma in your life and you interact with somebody, when you're in that burnout place, it might be more tender, it might be more activating, it might be more difficult because your system is so raw. So it can definitely be a common complexity. Gabor Mate talks a lot about trauma. He's neurodiverse himself and has experienced trauma, like so many of us clinicians in this field. And Gabor Mate says that trauma is not what happens to you, but it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens. So you might have experienced a traumatic event, but what's more important to notice and pay attention to is the trauma that's living inside of you as a result of the traumatic experience. And you might have experienced something that was significantly traumatic for you, and another person might not understand why that would be traumatic. That doesn't mean that your trauma isn't real, isn't valid, isn't significant. It means that you're probably a beautifully tender and sensitive person that was built a certain way, and that event really impacted you deeply. And what happened after the event was probably also ripe for that trauma being embedded in your system. And so sometimes it's hard when we're wanting to talk about these things with other people that don't understand trauma and neurodiversity because they might be a bit dismissive of your experience, not with malintent, just because they don't know and they don't understand. The traumatic experience matters, and what matters more is your experience of that. Often, late diagnosed autistics hold trauma, and trauma is also cumulative. So, what I mean by that is it can compound over time. So, let's say you had an experience of a relational trauma. So, that just means like a trauma in relationship with another person. And then maybe even with a different person, you had another event and another event and another event. And so it compounds over time. I think about it as like opening that file folder. You might have had one big event that takes up the whole file drawer, or you might have had multiple smaller events that also fill that whole drawer. Keeping in mind that trauma can be cumulative over time. And if you have a sensitive system, it can be one of those things that impacts us significantly because we're living with that significant stress response in our systems. And our nervous systems hold it. And we're already wired to be sensitive, tender beings. And so to have traumatic experiences happen to us, which often do, which we often feel very deeply, can kind of all compound. And that's often why trauma and neurodiversity coexist. Is this a time to unpack all your trauma? I don't know. I would say focusing on stability if you're experiencing autistic burnout or supporting somebody is going to be the most important part right now. It's a lot to take on unpacking the trauma when your foundation is so wiggly. For many people in burnout, unpacking trauma isn't available quite yet because their systems are focusing on stability. And maybe that's appropriate right now. When you're able to find that stability, then maybe you can start looking at some of those heavy traumas that you're holding in your system. And that will help because then as you're able to heal that, then you might feel lighter and you can engage in the world differently. And so it's all interconnected. I would consider trying to find a baseline of stability first before you start unpacking some of those pieces, unless it's so loud that you think that that piece will help. And then I would definitely explore some professional support. ChatGPT is not the same, and a place that can really hold you to unpack those pieces and help you find stability. Because when we unpack trauma, it's so tender and it can be so destabilizing. And if you're also in a place where your foundation's wiggly, you really do deserve the right support that can help you unpack those wounds that you're holding, those traumas that you're holding, and help you find some stability. So please don't do it on your own and don't do it with chat. All right. So, how do you support someone you love if you think they're going through autistic burnout or you know they're going through autistic burnout? Believe them, trust them. What they're experiencing and saying is true and real. How they're presenting to you in this moment is authentic to how they're doing, hopefully, if they're safe enough with you. And expect swings in energy and mood, expect inconsistencies. Know that they're doing their best right now. Know that this has been a long time coming. It's been building for a while, even if nobody knew, even the person experiencing it. And know if they don't take time now to recover, it could become a lot worse. So, in this tender time, offer what you can. Please don't offer what you can't. If you offer something and you aren't able to follow through, that can be really impactful. So before you do offer something, think about what you can offer and, of course, offer that. But try not to offer more and then not be able to follow through, because life is tricky and we care about people we love. But when somebody's in such a tender place and we, from a good place, want to be able to really support them, and then we aren't able to, that can be really impactful for that person. And ask less of them. Even a text can be so hard to respond to and take so much energy. Hey, just checking in. How are you? How does someone answer that question when they can barely function or move? So even those things that seem helpful and supportive or quick pop over can be very heavy and complicated, even in ways that you might not anticipate and the person experiencing might not anticipate. Just know that even asking how they are can be hard. Offer and allow space for response or non-responses. I know when I've had people in my life that have been really struggling, we've tried to make it really easy, our communication, and we do like a red, yellow, green in terms of like, how's your mental health right now? Offering favorite snacks as a drop off with no expectation to engage can be awesome if you know their favorite snacks. Often energy and appetite can really swing in wild ways. So if we have quick, easy access to food that is yummy and enticing, that can be really helpful. It's one thing we don't have to think about. And offer to share space, and then offer respect for solitude, right? It's going to be a tricky dance. This is very counselor of me. And I've said this same story before in another presentation about post-traumatic growth, but I love this story. So here I go. There was a girl who was walking down the street, and the wind and the sun had a conversation saying, I bet I can make her take off her coat. Oh, I bet I can make her take off her coat, said the wind. So the wind blew and blew and blew and tried to get the jacket to come off with its power. And the girl had the coat tighter and tighter and tighter. And the sunshine came out. gentle and warm, unassuming. And the girl took off her coat. I say this because sometimes we can think that we're helping by pushing, or you can do this, you're going to be okay, power through, double down. But that actually can have the opposite effect. When we're gentle and warm and not too hot, not direct sunlight, that person can then self-select to open up and share in a way that feels okay for them. Just a little metaphor there to think about. Okay, final thoughts. So yeah, gifts come in odd packages. And sometimes when we're on our knees, we learn more about ourselves than any other part of our life. So maybe autistic burnout is an opportunity, unpleasant as it is, to learn more about your limits at this time of your life, to learn more about what your needs are, and to learn more about how you can adjust your life or your lifestyle to move to live more in alignment with who you are. Because I truly feel when we're able to move more in alignment with who we are, we start to notice when it goes out of alignment more quickly because it feels odd. But we really are able to move closer towards thriving and feeling balanced and feeling well. And so this can be a chance to take a bit of inventory and do a bit of a deep dive into understanding who you are and what your needs are. And if you are able to make any changes to how you live, this might be a chance to really think about that. Who am I like when I'm balanced and when I'm unbalanced? And there might have been a time historically in your life where you were really balanced, and that's not working anymore because we aren't static beings. We always change. We age, and our bodies age, and our preferences age, and our interests change. So thinking about a historic version and trying to relive and recreate that might not work. It might be a good starting point because you might think about what it felt like at that time, or you were honoring your creative self. And what did that look like then? How can you honor your creative self now? So it might be a helpful place to start, but I wouldn't expect to be able to kind of drag and drop that into current if it was a while ago. All right. If you're curious for more, I do have an ADHD workbook and that autistic self inventory. I have that one. You're welcome to check that one out too. And we have newsletters. I try not to inundate folks, but every couple weeks I send a newsletter out about what I'm going to talk about for the next monthly workshop, some PDFs that are free to download that might be interesting to you. So this was today. And then May 11th, we have disenfranchised grief. Oh, I'm really excited about that one. Grief doesn't always look like we might expect it to. And when society doesn't honor our grief, it can be really difficult. More than low demand, that's talking about pathological demand avoidance. And then in July, I'm going to be talking about when someone you love is struggling. So you're welcome to join those or check out the recordings afterwards. I send out the recordings through the newsletter as well. So if that's helpful for you, you're welcome to pop in there. And this is my direct contact. This is my social media handle and my email address. So if you have questions, comments, witty remarks, please feel free to send them over. We do have a time in the live workshops each month to do Q&A. So if you're ever curious about that for a specific topic, please hop on in. Otherwise, you're welcome to send something over. All right, here are some resources. So this was the one that I was talking about. I realize I don't have the date here. It's from December 2025. That's when it was written. Gabor Mate, The Myth of Being Normal. Oh man, love that book. One of my favorite of his. Devin Price that I mentioned as well, Unmasking Autism, Defining Autistic Burnout, another article there. But the person I didn't talk about is Janae Trauma Geek. So she talks all about the overlap of trauma and neurodiversity. Love that as well. And that's all. Thanks for showing up. We'll see you next time. Bye. Uh-oh.